It was late, later than I had ever been awake in that old part of town. The fog rolled thick across the graveyard, curling around the crooked headstones like fingers reaching for the sky. I remember the quiet first, an almost holy silence that made the hum of distant traffic seem obscene. The lamps flickered in that wavering, uncertain way, casting shadows that stretched too long, that moved just slightly when I blinked. I could hear the rustle of dry leaves underfoot, though no one was walking beside me. Somewhere far away, a crow let out a single lonely cry echoing off the cold stones. I thought I was alone, that I could find comfort in solitude. But then I saw it, or rather I felt it. A dark shape at the edge of the fog, unmoving, yet somehow aware. Its outline was soft, blurred by the mist, but unmistakable. My breath caught in my chest and the air seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin. The feeling wasn't fear at first, it was curiosity. I should have turned and walked away. I should have ignored the soft rustling behind me. But I didn't, and that's when I saw it. The fog was already thick when I stepped into the cemetery. It clung to my ankles, cold and damp, curling around the edges of broken stones. Even the air seemed heavier here, wet with something I couldn't name. Pale light from the fading sun leaked through the trees. It fell in slivers across mossed monuments, making shadows stretch and bend where they shouldn't. I paused. The wind had died. Everything felt held. A soft hum rose from somewhere deep in the mist. It wasn't music. Not quite a voice, just vibrations in the air brushing against my skin. I felt it first in my chest, then behind my eyes. It moved with me, or maybe I moved with it. A shadow flickered near a leaning tombstone, gone before I could blink. My footsteps whispered against the gravel. But it felt like the ground was listening. The fog thickened, swallowing the path behind me. I thought of turning back. But curiosity pressed my legs forward anyway. The hum, it shaped itself into words almost, but never whole. Letters curling in the mist, forming then dissolving. I thought I heard my name, or maybe I imagined it. Something shifted in the trees. A rustle, soft, deliberate. I froze. Even my own breath seemed too loud. A shadow moved again, just at the edge of sight. Not human, not animal, but it carried a weight. A presence that made my skin crawl and my stomach ache with recognition I couldn't place. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs. It smelled of earth and rain and something metallic. Every step I took made it stir, swirling around the bases of monuments, licking the edges of the grass. I followed the shadow, barely daring to look directly. It led me between two ancient oaks, where the fog thinned and the world felt smaller, compressed. Branches tapped softly against each other above me, a dry, brittle scratching. The hum shifted again, closer now, vibrating in my teeth, in my ears. It wasn't loud, but it was inescapable. I thought of the people buried here, names etched in stone, long erased by moss and time. Did they move through this fog too? Were they watching, waiting? The shadow darted once more, this time behind a cluster of gravestones. I followed. My hands brushed against cold stone. Letters I couldn't read, shapes I didn't recognize. The hum softened, then fractured into silence. A leaf fell somewhere behind me. It hit the ground like a whisper, and I realized the fog had stopped moving. I stood there, alone yet not alone. The air pressed against my lungs, tight and expectant. The shadow appeared again, not quite human, not quite gone. It hovered at the edge of vision. Just waiting, I wanted to speak, to ask it why it followed. But the words died in my throat, and the silence returned, heavy and deliberate. A soft breeze lifted, carrying a faint, bitter smell. I shivered, pulled my jacket tighter, and let the fog swallow me again. The light faded entirely. Shadows blended into shadows. I felt eyes on the back of my neck, on my shoulders, but when I turned, there was nothing. I walked until the path disappeared, until the trees became a wall of black shapes, until the fog hummed in my ears like a heartbeat, and then I stopped. I couldn't see the shadow anymore, couldn't hear the hum, but I knew it hadn't left. It was waiting. Somewhere, beneath the curling mist, something watched, and the fog whispered my name again. The trees opened into a clearing. Darkness pressed against the edges like velvet. The air smelled damp, moss, wet bark, something faintly bitter. A pale light flickered ahead. No lantern, no bulb, just a soft trembling glow hovering between trunks. It painted the surrounding leaves in silver and made shadows sway in ways that felt unnatural. I stepped forward. The ground beneath me was soft with fallen needles. Each footfall echoed too loudly, too sharp in the quiet. The trees moved around the light, not with the wind. They bent and swayed as if breathing, slow, deliberate, watching. I squinted into the haze. A shadow lingered just beyond the glow. Too tall, too still. It melted into the darkness each time I tried to look directly, yet I knew it was there. The air was heavy with tension. A faint hum ran along my spine. It wasn't unpleasant, but it made the hairs on my arms lift. The light pulsed, as if breathing too. A gentle, wavering rhythm. I imagined reaching out, fingers brushing its edges. But something stopped me. A shiver rolled down my neck, slow and cold. Every step I took made the clearing feel smaller. The shadows leaned closer. The silence stretched and tightened. Leaves rustled in ways that made me jump. But there was no wind. I caught the faint scent of smoke, or was it just the forest drying? It made my throat dry. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. And still, the light flickered, beckoning, distant and near all at once. The shadow moved, slow, uncertain, yet deliberate. It didn't flee. It didn't approach. It simply waited. I stopped. Breath caught. The clearing felt alive. Or maybe it was only my mind straining in the dark. The fog from earlier had returned, soft, curling, wrapping around my ankles. It carried the damp scent of earth and the faint metallic tang I couldn't place. I felt eyes against the back of my skull. Even without seeing the figure, I felt its gaze. I wanted to turn away, step back into the deeper darkness. But my legs moved forward, slow, careful, tentative. The pale light danced along the trunks. It left the shadow in flickering intervals. I thought I glimpsed a shape, a tall form, its edges blurred and trembling in the silver. Every time I blinked, it shifted, always just out of clarity. The clearing seemed smaller now. The trees leaned closer, their bark brushing my fingertips as I passed. It made the hum in the air thrum in my chest. And the shadow, it didn't move. Or maybe I didn't. The light pulsed again, and for a moment, I thought I could hear a whisper in its flicker. Not words, just a vibration, soft, almost teasing, like it knew I was watching. And waiting, I stopped. The echo of my footsteps lingered. Long after I had paused, stretching across the clearing like a slow sigh, the shadow stayed, just beyond reach, and the pale light continued to tremble alone, suspended in the hush of the forest. I couldn't tell if the trees were swaying at the light or if the light made the trees sway. Either way, it felt wrong, and I knew I wasn't meant to understand. The air grew colder. The damp pressed heavier. The clearing felt infinite and impossibly small at once. I took a slow breath and let the quiet fold around me. The shadow lingered. The pale light flickered. And I realized I was part of the silence now, waiting, watching, alone in the forest that had always been awake. The cemetery stretched wider now, older stones leaning, cracked, covered in moss. The fog clung low, settling over the ground like a heavy quilt. I walked past an old family grave. The markers were tall and worn, names almost gone. The earth smelled faintly of damp clay and something metallic like iron brushing against roots. My footsteps fell softly, but then I heard another set. Distant, slow, mimicking my pace, I froze. The air tightened around my chest. The fog swirled between the gravestones, curling at the edges of vision. Something moved there, just beyond clarity. Each stone seemed alive. A subtle shift, a tilt, a shadow where none should be. I blinked. When I looked again, it was unchanged. But the feeling lingered, uneasy, insistent. The footsteps followed. Closer now, soft, careful, deliberate, never quite touching the ground I stood on, but close enough that I could feel the static of presence against my back. The shadow figure appeared again. Just beyond the reach of the fog, its form blurred, impossible to name. I could feel it observing me, leaning with the trees, merging with the mist. The air smelled colder here. Wet stone and decayed leaves with a sharp edge that made my tongue feel dry. Every breath echoed in my chest. I wondered if it echoed in the shadows, too. A branch tapped somewhere behind me. I didn't move. But the footsteps continued, pacing me, stopping when I stopped. Starting when I stepped again, I wanted to call out, to ask if something was there. But my voice refused me. It stuck, caught in my throat, trembling and small. The fog thickened. It wound around my ankles, rising higher with each step. The stones shifted again, or maybe my eyes tricked me. A carving caught my attention, a figure etched into granite. For a moment I swore its eyes moved. Then they were still. The shadow moved closer. I felt a brush of air along my arm, a subtle shift in weight, like something leaning in too near to touch. The fog pressed against my skin. I shivered. Every step I took made the clearing smaller. The gravestones leaned toward me, their edges jagged in the pale moonlight. I could hear the echo of my heartbeat, thudding like a drum against the hush of the cemetery. I stopped near a low marker. The footsteps behind me stopped too. Silence filled the gap between them. It was thick, waiting, like the fog itself had teeth. The shadow wavered. Not fully visible, but its presence was undeniable. I felt it in the hair on my arms, in the chill pressing against my neck, in the pull of the earth beneath my feet. I leaned closer to one of the gravestones, letting my fingers trace the mossed edge. The stone felt colder than it should, firmer than memory. I could almost hear a whisper, so soft I thought it was my imagination. Another step, soft, following. The fog moved with it, curling around my ankles, lifting and falling, as though guiding me forward without direction. I realized then I had been holding my breath. I let it go, slowly. The exhale dissolved into the mist, and for a moment, the footsteps paused again. I wanted to leave, but my legs moved as if drawn, step by step, closer to the shadow, closer to whatever watched just beyond the reach of sight. The family grave loomed behind me now. I glanced back. The shadow lingered, still, waiting, almost stepping forward but never quite entering the space I occupied. The fog curled tighter around my feet. The hum of presence ran along my spine. The air was thick with something I could not name, something waiting for acknowledgement I was too afraid to give. I took a slow breath. Let it fill my lungs. The footsteps faded, but the shadow did not. It remained at the edge of vision, leaning with the fog, watching, waiting, and I knew. I could walk through the cemetery forever, and it would still be there. Just beyond reach, just beyond sight, following me, always following. The fog had thickened again. It clung to my legs, damp and insistent. The air smelled of wet stone and cold earth. Everything was silent. Too silent. A tombstone emerged from the mist, older than anything I had seen before. Its surface glistened as if wet. I reached out slowly. The stone pulsed beneath my fingers, softly, rhythmically, like it breathed. Shadows twisted over the surface, faint, impossible shapes that bent with the fog. It was alive, or pretending to be. I couldn't tell which frightened me more. I stepped back. The fog followed, soft, curling, brushing against my ankles. The air pressed heavier. Each breath tasted of damp stone and iron. The shadow figure lingered just beyond the edge of the mist. Watching, waiting. It didn't move closer. But I felt it lean in, pressing against the edges of my awareness. I circled the tombstone slowly. Every angle made the surface shift again. The pulse quickened, then slowed, like it was matching my heartbeat, or my fear. The ground beneath my feet seemed softer here, almost spongy. The fog carried a faint hum now, so low I felt it in my teeth, in the hollow of my chest. The shadows twisted higher. A streak of black climbed along the stone. I wanted to look away, but curiosity held me. My hand hovered above the surface. A tremble ran through my fingers. The stone pulsed again. Stronger this time, almost calling. The figure shifted, not forward, not backward. Just waiting. Its presence made the fog heavier, pressed down against my shoulders, tightened around my chest. I smelled something acrid now, Burnt wood, or maybe decayed leaves. It lingered in the mist, and I shivered despite the damp. The stone pulsed once more. It felt like a breath escaping the earth itself, and then a second. Slow, deliberate, almost a whisper in rhythm. I wanted to touch it. I wanted to run. Both at once. The shadow stayed at the edge. I couldn't see details, just the sense of it, leaning, observing, patient, silent. The fog thickened further. Each inhale was colder, wetter, heavier. The Tombstones' pulse slowed, and I realized my own heartbeat matched it, a shared rhythm, a tether between me and something older than memory. I stepped closer. The mist swirled around my legs, lifting, curling, moving with a will of its own. The Tombstone's surface shimmered faintly, like water flowing over stone. And still the shadow watched. I whispered nothing, only breathed. The fog caught my breath and held it. The stone pulsed again, slower, steadier. I felt it through my chest, through my spine. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. Even the fog seemed to anchor me, pulling my attention to the stone, to the figure beyond, to the slow, steady pulse that felt like life itself. A leaf fell across the wet stone. It landed softly, rustling against the surface. The pulse flickered, then continued, and the shadow shifted, leaning, patient, just beyond the mist. I stepped back, finally. The fog followed. The Tombstone still pulsed, alive, breathing, waiting, and I realized the shadow would not leave. It would linger just beyond vision as I walked through the cemetery, through the fog, through the silence that now had weight. The stone breathed beneath the mist, and I was caught in its rhythm. The fog thickened again, heavier this time. It curled around my legs, filled the hollows between gravestones, and carried a damp, metallic tang that made my throat dry. I noticed them first as glimmers, small, reflective points of light low in the mist. Pairs of eyes, faint, cold, unblinking. They blinked slowly, deliberately, then vanished when I tried to focus on them. Every time I turned my head, they appeared somewhere else. Above, below, at the edge of the clearing, the air was still, too still. Even my own breath sounded loud. I could feel it rolling through my chest, tight, wet, and anxious. Shapes drifted in the fog. Impossible shapes, edges softened by the mist, moving closer, then dissolving into nothing. I wanted to follow them, to see where they led, but the fear in my chest held me frozen. The figure was closer now, just beyond the mist, leaning into the edges of my perception. It made no sound, no footsteps. Yet I felt its presence brush against my skin. The eyes multiplied, a pair here, another there. Watching from the fog, reflecting the faint, pale light that barely reached the clearing, I stepped carefully. The ground was soft with moss and fallen needles. Each step echoed more than it should, bouncing back at me, and the eyes blinked again. Mirrored, unblinking, curious. The fog seemed alive. It swirled around my ankles, brushed my fingertips, carried the scent of wet earth and decayed leaves. Static hummed in my teeth, in my ears. Every shadow leaned closer. I tried to focus on one pair of eyes. They shimmered, reflective, and then they were gone. Something moved behind me. I felt the air shift, a cold brush against my shoulder, but when I turned, nothing. The eyes blinked again, all around me. Some low, some high, some almost within reach. But they melted into fog each time I looked directly. It was endless, impossible to escape. The figure shifted, closer still. Its edges blurred, leaning into the mist like smoke against the night. The fog pressed heavier, tight around my chest, sliding down my back in icy fingers. I stumbled. The soft moss gave way under my foot. My breath hitched. The eyes swirled in patterns now, shifting, flickering, reflecting the faint moonlight. They were everywhere. And nowhere. The figure moved again, silently, closer, just beyond clarity. I felt its attention, weighting the air around me, folding the mist like a hand over my shoulder. I whispered nothing, not even my own name. The fog caught my breath, held it. The eyes blinked, and I felt every one of them in my chest. Sharp, pressing, insistent. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Step by step, I was trapped in the fog, in the rhythm of blinking eyes, in the silent advance of the shadow. The mist carried a faint hum. I couldn't tell if it came from the earth, from the stone, or from the presence that now hovered inches from me. Every hair on my arms lifted, every nerve stretched taut. The eyes blinked one final time. I realized they weren't observing me individually. They were watching as a whole, a collective gaze, unyielding, anchored in the fog itself. I exhaled slowly. The fog softened around my legs. The eyes dimmed, vanished into the mist, leaving only the silent presence. The figure lingered, leaning into the haze, patient, unmoving. And I stood there, alone in the clearing, the damp chill pressing against my skin, the echo of unseen eyes still hovering in my chest. I took a step forward. The fog parted slightly, revealing nothing but shadows and breathing mist. And I knew. The eyes would return, always returning to blink silently from the fog, watching, waiting, and I would never be free of them. The forest pressed in closer now. Trees leaned overhead, tangled branches blotting the pale moonlight. Dry leaves littered the ground, brittle and sharp underfoot. A faint crackle sounded. Leaves shifting in shadows. I froze. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, tinged with something metallic, almost iron. A low hum vibrated through the soil. Not loud, but enough to make my chest thrum. It carried beneath my feet, through my fingers brushing the undergrowth, through the damp fog clinging to my ankles. Something moved. I felt it before I saw it. A cold brush against my arm, like fingertips sliding past, soft, deliberate, leaving goosebumps in their wake. The rustling continued, whispering along the edges of the clearing. Branches swayed without wind, casting twisted shadows that merged with the fog. Each movement made the air heavier. Each pause made my own heartbeat echo in my ears. I stepped forward carefully. The leaves cracked again underfoot, louder than they should be, as though drawing attention. The hum deepened, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, through the hollow of my chest. A whisper, breath against my ear. No words, just exhalations curling in the mist. Cold, wet teasing. I turned, but the fog swallowed everything beyond a few steps. The shadows moved differently here, shaped like something familiar, then dissolved into nothing. I thought I saw a figure crouch among the roots, vanishing when my gaze shifted. The fog rippled where it had been. I paused. The hum pulsed in tandem with my breathing. Every step forward made it louder, then softer, like a heartbeat shared with the earth itself. The underbrush rustled again. Something brushed my sleeve. A faint pressure along my spine. I felt my skin tighten, goosebumps rising like tiny hills on my arms. I bent slightly to inspect the leaves. They were still, but the feeling lingered. Something alive moving just beyond the reach of sight. The fog thickened. It wrapped around my legs, rising toward my knees. The shadows grew longer, stretching toward me like reaching fingers. The hum vibrated stronger now, sending a tingle through my teeth, a static that made my scalp prickle. I tried to listen, to distinguish movement from silence, but the forest seemed alive with subtle motion. Every crackle, every rustle felt deliberate, like it was guiding me, or watching me. A finger, cold and wet, brushed against my shoulder. I jerked, heart lurching, but the fog absorbed the movement instantly. No one was there. Nothing was there. And yet I felt it linger. I stepped forward again. The leaves whispered beneath me. The hum vibrated beneath my feet, then shifted upward, tugging at the back of my skull. I shivered. The underbrush rustled closer, soft footsteps sliding just behind me. Never touching the ground I stood on, never making a sound I could place. I could feel its presence. Heavy, patient, waiting, I stopped. The forest fell silent. The fog hung thick and cold. I could smell the damp soil and decayed leaves. The hum had receded, leaving a hollow thrum in my chest. And then, nothing moved. No shadows stretched, no fingers brushed, no rustle whispered. I exhaled slowly, letting my breath melt into the fog. But I knew it hadn't left. Something lingered in the underbrush, watching, waiting, patient as the earth itself. I took a careful step forward. The fog parted slightly. The leaves remained still. But the memory of those cold fingertips stayed with me, and the hum, soft, insistent, echoed beneath the soil, a quiet warning that I was not alone. The fog thinned slightly as I approached the far edge of the cemetery. Twisted trees arched overhead, their branches tangled like fingers. The air smelled cold and damp, heavy with the scent of wet stone. A door appeared between two leaning gravestones, old, weathered, slightly ajar. The wood looked swollen with moisture, the metal hinges rusted, faintly trembling. I stepped closer. The fog clung to my legs. My breath tasted of damp earth and decayed leaves. Inside, darkness pooled like liquid. It swallowed the pale light spilling from the opening, leaving only a hollow black that seemed to breathe. Every instinct whispered to turn away. But curiosity, curious, insistent, pulled me closer. A shadow lingered at the threshold. Tall, indistinct. It leaned slightly as if watching, waiting. I could feel its weight pressing against the fog, pressing against me, though it made no sound. I swallowed. The air trembled faintly with a low hum. It rose from the ground, from the soil beneath my feet, or perhaps from the darkness itself. The smell of cold stone deepened. Wet, musty, ancient. I extended a hand, fingers brushing against the door's warped edge. The wood was slick, damp with something I couldn't name. It pulsed lightly under my touch like the tombstone that had seemed to breathe earlier. The shadow shifted. Not forward. Not backward, just moving with the fog. Blending, leaning, silent. Its presence pressed against the edges of my awareness, making my skin prickle, my chest tighten. The darkness inside the crypt seemed to stretch, pulling at the edges of the doorframe. Light from outside vanished into it, leaving only that liquid black so thick it almost had texture. I imagined stepping in and being swallowed whole. The fog swirled around my ankles, curling higher. It carried the faint hum along with it, vibrating in my teeth, along my spine, through the hollow of my chest. I inhaled slowly. The musty scent filled my nose. The faint smell of decay lingered, mixed with a sharper tang I couldn't place. It made my stomach tighten. The shadow shifted again. Just beyond the doorway. I could not tell its shape, not fully. Only the sense of it leaning, watching, patient, silent. I stepped closer. The fog parted slightly around my feet. The ground beneath the door was uneven, slick with damp soil and fallen leaves. Every step sounded louder than it should, echoing in the hollow air, but the shadow made no sound. A low vibration ran through the floor. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my fingers tingle. I felt it in my chest, and I realized it matched the pulse of the tombstone I had touched earlier. The crypt seemed alive. The shadow lingered at the edge of the doorway. It did not move forward. It did not retreat, just leaned patient still. The fog curled around my legs like fingers, pulling me slightly toward the darkness. I could feel the air pressing against my lungs, thick and damp. The hum deepened. The darkness inside the crypt seemed to breathe, drawing at the edges of my awareness. I placed a hand on the door. It was slick, pulsing faintly. I wanted to push it open. I wanted to turn and run. Both urges pressed equally against me. The shadow shifted slightly, leaning closer, but still remaining just beyond reach. I could feel it in the fog, the damp, heavy hum vibrating through the soles of my shoes, through the hollow of my chest. I stepped back. The door remained slightly ajar. The darkness inside still pulsed and breathed. The shadow stayed at the threshold, watching, waiting, patient, silent. I exhaled slowly. The fog curled around my legs. The hum softened, lingering like a heartbeat in the floor. The crypt seemed to breathe on its own, and the shadow did not leave. I knew even if I walked away, the darkness would remain. The door would stay ajar, and the figure would wait just beyond the fog, watching, patient, silent. The cemetery lay quiet, but the silence felt wrong. The fog hung heavy over the ground, swirling between gravestones, curling around moss and roots. A soft hum rose from beneath the soil. Low, vibrating through my shoes, through my fingers brushing the cracked edges of tombstones. It wasn't loud, but it pressed against my chest, made the hairs along my arms lift. Shadows stretched unnaturally. They leaned over the stones, bent and twisted in impossible angles. I blinked and they shifted slightly, like water rippling across a dark surface. I stepped carefully. The fog clung to my legs, damp, cold, curling higher with each motion. The smell of wet earth and decayed leaves filled my nose. Stone engravings caught my attention. Letters I thought were still moved subtly, curved, shifting just at the edge of vision. I traced a finger over one, cold, rough, wet. It pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat beneath my touch. The hum grew warmer. It rose from beneath the stones, vibrating in my teeth through the hollow of my chest. It pressed against my senses, subtle, insistent, alive. I felt the fog wrap tighter around my ankles. It brushed my skin like fingers, curling around my calves, guiding me toward the center of the cemetery. Shadows leaned closer. The figures of stone seemed to bend, stretching upward as if the carvings themselves were reaching. The lines and shapes of names and dates blurred, waving like heat over pavement. A low breeze stirred, bringing a faint metallic tang with it. The hum pulsed in rhythm, matching my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat had slowed to match it. I knelt beside a weathered tombstone. The stone's surface shimmered faintly. The letters seemed to twitch like insects moving under glass. I pressed my palm flat against it. The vibration traveled through me, soft, alive, unsettlingly gentle. The fog parted slightly. Soft, curling tendrils lifted from the ground. They swirled around my legs, brushed against my fingers, pulled my gaze upward. Shadows stretched again, higher this time, leaning over multiple stones, bending into shapes I couldn't name. The hum rose with them, a faint chorus beneath the earth, vibrating against my ribs. I felt a static along my scalp, a tingle along my arms. Every step echoed too sharply, yet the echoes were absorbed by the fog. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. The carvings shifted once more. Subtle at first, then more deliberate. Letters elongated, curves bending, edges softening. The stone seemed alive, breathing beneath the hum. I rose slowly, careful not to disturb anything further. The fog parted slightly around me, revealing twisted shadows stretching into the dark corners of the cemetery. The hum continued, low, insistent, pressing against my chest, filling the space between the gravestones. I took a slow breath. The damp air tasted of earth and iron, tangling with the subtle pulse beneath my feet. The fog coiled around my ankles, silent, watchful, patient. The hum softened like a heartbeat fading into sleep. The shadows leaned less aggressively now, but the feeling of them remained, pressing at the edges of my awareness, bending the shapes of stone, guiding my gaze, keeping me within the circle of their quiet, insistent presence. I stepped backward carefully. The fog followed, curling around my ankles and calves, dragging a whisper of chill along my skin. The stone beneath my hand pulsed one final time. A faint vibration, alive, breathing, a reminder that the cemetery was not as still as it seemed. I stood, alone, listening to the low hum beneath the stones, watching shadows stretch in impossible ways, feeling the weight of quiet wonder and unease settling over me like a cold, soft blanket. The forest trail was familiar, or I thought it was. Twisting dirt path, gnarled roots, the smell of wet pine needles. Fog hung low, curling around the base of the trees, thickening with each step. Then the path disappeared. Mid-step, the earth vanished beneath my feet. The trail no longer existed. Only dense white mist stretched in every direction. I stopped, tried to retrace my steps. The fog shifted. Landmarks I had passed a moment ago were gone, or had moved. Trees leaned differently. Stones I remembered were absent. And the smell, wet earth, decay, was stronger here, heavier, closer. A shadow moved just beyond the mist. Closer than ever. I felt its gaze press against my back. Weightless but undeniable. It leaned in, patient, waiting, silent. My own footsteps echoed, louder than they should be. Each step swallowed in fog, then repeated, displaced, as if the forest itself were bending the sound. I tried to focus on a single tree, a landmark. It wavered, breathed with the fog, edges blurred. The shadow crept closer, but never fully emerged. The air smelled damp, metallic, like rain on stone, or blood faintly carried on the wind. A low hum vibrated beneath my feet, almost imperceptible, but it matched the tension in my chest. I took a step forward. The fog thickened. Roots shifted beneath my shoes. Twisting, reaching. The path vanished again. I turned back. The same fog greeted me. The forest looped, folded in on itself. Nothing looked familiar. I froze. Felt the pressure of the shadow at my shoulder. A presence I could not see but knew existed. It leaned with the fog, pressing into my awareness. I tried to listen. Branches rustled. Dry leaves cracked under invisible weight. Whispers of air sliding between the trees. Every direction felt wrong, every sound slightly displaced. I bent down to touch the moss on a nearby trunk. Cold, damp, rough under my fingers. The vibration of the hum grew stronger. Through the earth, through my bones. It hummed beneath the stones I couldn't see. The shadow moved again. Closer, still at the edge of the fog. I could feel it in my hair, in the prickling skin along my arms, leaning, waiting, patient. I stepped backward. The forest seemed to shift. The trail I had been on no longer existed in any direction. Trees leaned differently, roots twisted like frozen fingers. The fog pressed heavier, curling around my ankles, guiding me toward the center of some unseen clearing. My breath came in shallow gasps. Cold, damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. Every step echoed displaced. Every shadow leaned closer. The hum pulsed softly beneath me, anchoring me in the forest's silent rhythm. I turned slowly. The shadow paused at the edge of visibility. It did not move forward. It did not retreat. Only leaned, waiting. The fog swirled around it, hiding it, but making its presence undeniable. I tried to focus, one step at a time. The path seemed to exist only where my mind imagined it. Every landmark flickered, vanished, returned in wrong positions. The forest itself seemed to breathe. Edges of fog lifted, twisted, pressed against me. I felt the shadow brushing the edge of my vision. A cold pull against my chest. A hum vibrating through the soil, through the roots, through me. I exhaled slowly. The fog softened around my legs. The shadow remained at the edge, patient, unmoving, closer than ever. The path, if it existed, was gone, and I was caught in the forest's quiet, folded within the mist, anchored by its presence, unable to move forward or back. I took another slow step. The fog shifted, and I realized the path would vanish again. The shadow would follow, always closer, always watching, and the forest would never let me leave. The mausoleum rose before me, its stone walls pale under the faint moonlight. Air pressed cold against my skin, tinged with damp stone and the faintest trace of decay. I stepped inside. The door groaned softly behind me, then settled into silence. The marble floor gleamed faintly, slick with condensation, cold against my shoes. Each footstep echoed impossibly long. The sound stretched down the corridors, folded back over itself, making the space feel endless, larger than it should be. The shadow figure hovered near, just beyond the edge of clarity. I could feel it leaning into the fog of my awareness, pressing against the cold air around me. It remained silent, patient, unmoving. The marble slabs shifted beneath my feet, not dramatically, only a subtle give like the stone breathed slowly beneath the weight of the mausoleum. I paused, fingers grazing the cold surface of a tomb, and felt a faint vibration travel through my palm, soft, deliberate, alive. The corridors narrowed. The fog from outside seeped in through cracks in the walls, curling around my ankles, lifting and twisting in invisible fingers. The hum of the earth followed me here, low and insistent, vibrating faintly in my chest. I walked carefully. Each step sounded louder, echoing, disjointed, multiplied. The shadows stretched along the walls, leaning, bending in impossible ways. I caught glimpses of shapes in the corner of my vision, twisting, shifting, then vanishing when I looked directly. The air smelled of cold stone, damp marble, and a faint metallic tang. Like something buried beneath centuries of dust, I moved along a row of slabs. Names, dates, and carvings blurred and twisted, edges softening and sharpening in rhythm with the hum beneath the floor. I pressed a hand against one. The vibration traveled through me, like the heartbeat of the building itself. The shadow drifted closer. No sound, only a presence, leaning into the edges of my awareness. I felt it in my hair, in the tingle along my arms, a cold pressure against my spine. I took another step. The marble seemed to shift again beneath me, subtle, almost liquid in its motion. The echoes of my steps folded into themselves, repeating in faint, overlapping rhythms. I tried to follow the sound, but the space seemed endless, a corridor without bounds. A low static hummed faintly under my feet, in the walls, pressing against my chest. I realized it mirrored the pulse I had felt beneath tombstones, beneath fog, beneath earth. The mausoleum was alive in quiet ways, breathing beneath the marble. The shadows along the walls leaned further, stretching toward me, then retreating into darkness. The figure hovered nearer still. I could feel its breath, if it breathed, in the cold, damp air, but saw nothing. I paused again, tried to listen. Each echo, each step, folded back like a whisper I could not catch. The cold pressed deeper into my chest, and the marble beneath my hand hummed faintly, vibrating through the bones in my fingers. I pressed my palm flat against another slab. It pulsed gently, alive but subtle. The shadow shifted slightly, leaning into the light, then blended back into darkness. I exhaled slowly. The mausoleum seemed to settle around me, but the echoes remained, folded into the marble, humming faintly beneath my feet. The corridors stretched farther than I could see. The fog lingered at the edges, curling around my legs and ankles, tugging softly at the edges of awareness. The shadow remained at the edge, hovering, patient. Closer than ever, I realized the building itself was watching. The slabs breathing beneath me, the walls shifting ever so slightly, and the figure hovering silently in the cold. I took another step. The echo followed me, folded into itself, and I understood. I was alone, but not alone. The mausoleum exhaled around me. The marble pulsed faintly beneath my hands, and the shadow lingered, patient, silent, watching. The cemetery stretched in quiet darkness, fog curling over the earth, damp and cold. I walked slowly between rows of tombstones, their edges rough beneath my fingers, cold, slick with moisture. A whisper drifted. A name, soft, almost indistinct. I froze. The mist seemed to thicken around the letters carved into the stones, condensing, curling like smoke. I leaned closer. The stone felt alive beneath my fingertips. Faint vibrations pulsed in the air, matching the soft, insistent hum I felt in the soil. Another whisper, another name, breathed along the grooves of the carvings. A shadow moved across the letters. Just beyond clarity, leaning, sliding, patient. I could feel its presence in the fog, pressing against the damp air around me. It did not speak, yet the whispers seemed tied to it, rising from its movement. The fog wrapped around my legs. I could feel it curl against my ankles, cold and deliberate, guiding my gaze along the tombstones. Letters stretched and bent subtly in the mist, words almost shifting, alive with quiet energy. I reached out to a name. The stone pulsed beneath my hand. A faint warmth, like the memory of breath against cold marble. Another name whispered. Closer this time, drawing my attention, folding me into the fog's rhythm. The shadow hovered at the edge of my vision, silent, patient. Its presence leaned with the fog, pressing against my awareness. I could feel it in the hair on my arms, in the tingle along my spine, a cold pressure that made my chest tighten. Mist clung to the grooves of the carvings. It shimmered faintly in the pale light, curling like smoke around the letters. I traced one gently with my fingertip. It shifted ever so slightly beneath my touch like breathing stone, alive in its own slow rhythm. The whispers grew, low and insistent, names curling around each other in the mist. I could almost feel the stories embedded in the stone, echoing beneath the fog, folding into the cold earth. I stepped backward. The shadow drifted closer, leaning just beyond the clarity of my vision. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs. Lifting gently, guiding me along the row of tombstones, another name whispered. It seemed to come from beneath my feet, through the soil and stone, through the mist that hung heavy in the air. I pressed a hand flat against the ground. A faint vibration ran through me, soft, deliberate, alive. The carvings shifted subtly in the mist. Edges blurred, letters elongated, then settled back into place. The shadow moved along with them, hovering silently, ever patient, watching, as though the fog, the stone, and the whispers were one. I inhaled slowly. The cold air tasted of damp earth and iron. The fog curled around my ankles, lifting slightly with each breath. I felt the weight of the whispers, the pull of the shadow, and the subtle pulse beneath the stones. I stepped carefully forward. Names called softly, rising from the grooves of the carvings, folding around the mist, receding when I tried to focus on a single letter. The shadow hovered closer, leaning into the fog, pressing its presence against the edge of my awareness. I ran a finger along a weathered inscription. It pulsed faintly, alive, breathing beneath the touch. The whispers wrapped around me, soft, insistent, intimate. The fog shifted gently, guiding my gaze along the tombstones, toward shapes that seemed to move just at the edge of visibility. I exhaled slowly. The mist hung thick over the cemetery, the whispers fading, folding back into the stones. The shadow lingered, patient, silent, hovering among the names, watching, always watching. I stepped back. The fog curled around my legs. The hum beneath the earth softened. The stone beneath my fingertips was still, yet the memory of the whispers remained, and the shadow did not leave. The fog thinned abruptly. A sudden clearing opened before me. The damp air tasted of earth and stone, cool and heavy. No wind stirred. No sound carried, and there it stood. Perfectly still. A figure at the center of the clearing, shrouded in fog that hummed faintly, vibrating softly against the edges of perception. I froze. The fog curled around my ankles, lightly brushing against my skin. The figure did not move, did not breathe, yet its presence pressed against the quiet, anchoring the space around it. The clearing seemed unreal. Trees on the edge leaned inward, their branches twisted and silent. Shadows pooled where the fog thinned, bending subtly toward the figure. The hum rose faintly from the ground, a vibration through the soil, through my shoes, through the hollow of my chest. I stepped forward slowly. The fog shifted, curling around my legs, soft, deliberate, guiding me. Each breath drew the scent of wet earth, metallic, heavy, ancient. The figure remained still, silent, pressing into the awareness around me. I looked down at the ground. Every leaf, every root was perfectly still. No wind stirred, but the fog rippled faintly, vibrating like it was alive, a pulse in sync with the figure. I reached out with my hand. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing softly against my skin. The figure did not flinch, did not acknowledge me. It existed simply as presence, anchored in the center of the clearing. The hum beneath my feet grew slightly stronger. Subtle, almost imperceptible at first, then insistent, pressing into the soles of my shoes. I felt it rise through my legs, through my spine, as if the clearing itself had a heartbeat. The fog thickened again at the edges. I could barely see the trees, only vague shapes leaning inward. Shadows stretched toward the figure, twisting along the ground, bending unnaturally in the pale light. I took a careful step closer. The ground was cold, damp. Each step echoed softly, but was swallowed by the mist before it could reach the edges of the clearing. The vibration hummed beneath my feet, and I realized the fog itself was not still but alive, folding around the figure, pressing me toward it. I exhaled slowly. The clearing was silent except for the hum, soft and unyielding. The figure did not blink, did not move. I could feel its presence at the edge of my vision, pressing against my awareness like a weightless shadow. I tried to focus on the edges of the clearing. The fog twisted unnaturally around the bases of trees, reaching, curling, stretching like faint fingers. The scent of wet stone and decayed leaves filled the air. I could almost feel the pulse of the earth, the slow hum of life beneath the fog, rising to meet the figure. The figure leaned slightly, but only in perception, as though my gaze created movement where none existed. I blinked. It was still perfectly still. The fog vibrated faintly. The hum rose softly, threading through my chest, pressing gently against my ribs. I took another careful step. The air pressed heavier. Cold moisture clung to my skin, curling around my ankles, tugging softly with each breath. The figure remained, unmoved, silent. I exhaled again. The fog thickened at the edges, humming, folding around me. The clearing was a pocket of unease, isolated, anchored by the figure's presence. I stepped back slowly. The fog curled at my ankles like soft fingers. The figure stayed in the center, still, perfectly still. No wind, no sound. Only presence, and the hum. Soft, insistent, folding around the edges of the clearing, watching, waiting. The cemetery stretched endlessly in the pale moonlight. Fog curled along the ground, thick and damp, pressing against my ankles, clinging to my shoes. A sudden chill brushed the back of my neck. Cold breath fogged the air behind me. I couldn't see its source. Couldn't turn without feeling the pressure in my chest. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my feet. Soft, almost imperceptible, like the pulse of something deep below the soil. I bent down to touch the grass. It quivered lightly beneath my palm. The hum rose faintly, threading through my bones. Shadows curled and twisted around the tombstones, smoke-like coiling over etched names, edges blurred and reformed. I could feel them reaching, pressing into the fog, leaning toward me without movement. I stepped forward. The cold breath followed, brushing my hair, pressing lightly at my shoulders. Each footstep echoed softly, then folded back over itself, displaced in the mist. The tombstones leaned subtly in the fog. I caught movement in the corner of my vision. Shapes shifting, twisting, then vanishing when I looked directly. The fog thickened at the edges, and the hum beneath my feet deepened. A vibration threading through the soles of my shoes, into my legs, through my spine. I exhaled slowly. The air tasted of wet earth and cold stone. The shadows seemed denser near the older graves, older stones slick with moisture, the inscriptions blurred by time and mist. A name whispered. I thought I imagined it. Another followed. Soft, deliberate, curling through the fog. The cold breath rose again, closer this time. I could feel it on my neck, along the back of my arms. I pressed a hand to the nearest tombstone. Cold, rough, it seemed to pulse under my touch, in sync with the vibrations beneath the earth. Shadows danced across the carvings, leaning, curling, stretching impossibly along the damp ground. I stepped back. The fog thickened, pressing against my legs like soft fingers. The breath lingered, and the hum beneath the soil continued, soft but insistent. I looked at the tombstones around me. Names shifted in the mist. Edges blurred, then reformed as if breathing. The shadows coiled tighter around the bases, leaning, waiting. I took another careful step. The ground vibrated faintly beneath me again. The cold breath pressed closer. The fog swirled in slow, deliberate waves, curling around my ankles, lifting slightly with each exhale. The tombstones whispered softly, names curling in the fog. I tried to follow one, tracing letters with my fingertips. They pulsed under my touch, alive, responding to my presence. I felt the shadows lean toward me, their edges blurred, coiling like smoke around the stones. The cold breath lingered just behind, tugging gently at the hair on my neck. I could feel it in my chest, pressing softly against the rhythm of my heartbeat. The fog thickened again. The hum beneath my feet rose faintly, threading through my bones, through the wet soil, through the mist curling along the ground. I exhaled slowly. The tombstones leaned silently in the fog. Shadows coiled, watching. The cold breath lingered, soft, insistent, pressing at the edges of my awareness. I stepped backward. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my shoes. The shadows retreated slightly, only to coil again with the next pulse of the earth. The whispers curled softly through the fog, names rising and fading, breathing with the stones. I felt exposed, alone, but not alone. The cold breath, the vibrations, the coiling shadows, all waiting, patient, anchored to the graves, to the earth, to the fog. I exhaled again. The cemetery held its silence. The hum softened. The cold breath lingered faintly. The shadows coiled among the tombstones, watching, waiting. The fog pressed close, heavy, damp, curling around my ankles. The air tasted of cold stone and wet earth. A movement shifted in the mist. Pale, impossible to focus on. A shadow drifted against the fog, edges blurring, flickering, like moonlight caught in motion. I froze. Heartbeat thudded loudly in my chest, echoing in the silence around me. The fog seemed to hold its breath. Even the trees leaned inward, branches trembling softly yet making no sound. The shadow moved with no rhythm I could follow. It stretched, condensed, then flickered at the edges, folding into itself, then unfolding again. I tried to focus. My eyes ached. The figure was always slightly beyond clarity. The ground beneath my feet vibrated faintly. Cold seeped into my shoes, pressed through the soles, threaded into my legs. The fog rose slightly with each breath I took, curling against my skin, damp, deliberate. I stepped closer. The shadow drifted backward. No wind, no sound. Just presence, pale and immense in the mist. I felt its weight against the edges of my awareness, leaning into the fog, into the space I occupied. The air smelled faintly of wet moss, iron, and the cold pulse of stone. I reached out with a hand. The fog was thick, pressing softly, resisting the intrusion of my fingers. The shadow did not react, but seemed to draw closer in perception. I exhaled slowly. The heartbeat in my chest echoed again, louder than it should be, folding back against the silence of the clearing. The fog swirled faintly, rippling in patterns I could not follow. The shadow flickered once more, edges elongating, then folding into the mist. I could feel it brushing against my senses, cold, subtle, patient. I shivered. The air pressed tighter around me, damp, alive, insistent. I stepped forward again. The ground beneath my feet hummed faintly, vibrating through my shoes. The fog moved with it, curling around my legs, lifting slightly with each heartbeat. The shadow remained just beyond vision, its pale edges shimmering like faint moonlight. I tried to blink it away. It lingered, folded in and out of perception, always present, always just beyond understanding. My breath hung in the air, visible in the cold mist, trembling slightly. The fog shifted subtly, curling around my shoulders, pressing lightly at my back. I could feel the shadow leaning in, weightless, yet insistent, tracing me with its presence. I exhaled again, soft, slow, deliberate. The shadow flickered once more, elongating across the fog, edges stretching and vanishing, then curling back into itself. I could hear nothing but my heartbeat, echoing in the vast silence. The mist seemed to pulse with it, swaying gently, alive in rhythm with my chest. The shadow remained, still impossible to focus on, pale, ephemeral, immense. I stepped backward. The fog pressed against my ankles again, curling, insistent, holding me in place. The shadow drifted with me, always just beyond clarity, folded into the mist. I exhaled slowly, and the fog thinned slightly at the edges. The heartbeat slowed, folded into the silence. The shadow hovered, watching, pale as moonlight, patient, immense, beyond understanding. The fog clung to the ground, thick and damp, curling around my ankles. The night was still. Too still, I walked slowly, each footfall soft against the wet earth, yet precise, deliberate, and then another step. Not ahead, not to the side, but behind me, perfectly timed. Every step syncing with the rhythm of my own pulse. I stopped. The fog pressed closer. My breath curled in the cold air, hanging visible, trembling. Silence pressed against my ears, but the steps continued. Slow, deliberate, unyielding. I turned slightly. Nothing. The mist swallowed the world behind me. The footsteps continued. Matched my heartbeat exactly. Faint, insistent, invisible. The trees leaned inward. Branches rubbed softly against each other, a whisper of rustling. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my shoes. Each step I took answered with another. I was not alone. But I could not see them. I exhaled slowly. The fog shifted, curling around my legs, pressing softly at my ankles. The footsteps. They followed. No source, no shadow, only echoing pulses against the silence. I tried to quicken my pace. A step fell in sync. Faster, faster, matching my heartbeat, matching my pulse. The air grew heavier, cold, damp, pressing against my skin. I could feel it in my chest, the weight of presence behind me. Leaves cracked softly beneath my shoes. but no other sound followed. Only the steps that mirrored my own. Each one precise, meticulous, anchored to my motion. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Fog swallowed everything. Branches bent slightly as if leaning closer. Shadows twisted faintly in the mist. But the figure, the source, remained unseen. The earth vibrated faintly beneath me. Soft pulses threading through the fog, through the roots, through the cold soil. The footsteps. They matched the pulse. Every step a reflection of mine. I was tethered. I was mirrored. The fog thickened. I could feel it curling around my shoulders, pressing lightly against my back. The steps remained. No matter my speed, no matter my hesitation. Invisible, insistent, unbroken. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves, earth, cold stone from graves nearby. The fog swirled softly around my legs, lifting slightly with each exhale. The steps followed. Perfectly measured. Aligned with my pulse, I tried to run. My shoes pressed into the wet soil, splashing lightly, faster, but the steps followed, each one landing in exact rhythm with my own. The fog pressed heavier at my ankles, leaning, curling, holding me in place. I slowed. The steps slowed. I stopped. The air was heavy, thick with mist, alive with presence. The steps, they stopped too. Just for a moment. Then continued. I exhaled slowly. The fog wrapped around me, damp, insistent, like soft fingers curling along my legs. The footsteps traced my own rhythm, tethered to my pulse, following me with patience, with quiet certainty. I moved again, slow, deliberate. Each step answered by another. Matched exactly. The fog swirled at the edges of vision, pressing closer. The night held its breath. And I felt it behind me, waiting, unseen, perfectly aligned with my own heartbeat. I stopped, and the steps stopped. The fog pressed, silent, waiting, heavy with presence, unyielding. The fog pressed close, thick, damp, curling along the ground. The lamp beside me flickered faintly, pale and fragile, casting weak circles of light into the mist. And then it went out. A single blink, and the pale light vanished, swallowed by the fog. Shadows deepened where none should exist. I exhaled slowly. The air was cold and heavy, tinged with wet earth and the faint scent of stone. My shoes pressed softly into the soil. Each step echoed briefly, then was absorbed by the thick haze. The fog thickened. Shapes formed, then dissolved, twisting along the edges of perception. A tombstone leaned strangely, its outline uncertain, as if bending in the mist. I stopped. The air was heavy. I could feel the fog pressing against my skin, cool and insistent. My breath fogged before me, floating in the dense air. Every exhale carried a pulse of fear, carried it into the gray that surrounded me. Shadows moved where no light should reach. They twisted along the ground, leaned against stones, slid through the fog in slow, deliberate arcs. I tried to step forward. The fog resisted, curling at my ankles, softly pulling, holding me in place. I whispered a breathless thought. No sound returned. Only the shifting of fog and the subtle hum beneath the soil. The earth vibrated faintly underfoot, threading through my legs into my chest. I lifted a hand. The fog clung to it, wet, damp, pressing softly against my skin. Shapes twisted just beyond my reach, vanishing when I tried to focus. The shadows leaned closer, folding into the darkness left by the lamp. I stepped carefully. Each motion swallowed by the fog. I could not see beyond 2 feet. The world felt smaller yet infinite, folded into the mist that pressed around me. A sound, soft, almost imperceptible. Something shifted in the fog. I could feel it brushing past, though nothing was visible. Cold touched my arm. Brief, fleeting, gone before I could catch it. I exhaled again. The fog pulsed slightly, thick and alive, pressing at my legs, curling at my feet. Shadows twisted across surfaces that were not there. The world had become uncertain, breathing, alive in the gray. I took another step. The lamp remained dark. The fog swallowed all remaining light, folding it into itself, pressing against my chest. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in the silence, a lonely drum in the thick, damp air. The shapes continued to shift. Noises whispered faintly, rustling hums, breaths, all swallowed instantly by the fog. I could feel shadows leaning closer, pressing with the weight of presence, soft, patient, unyielding. I moved slowly, one step then another. The ground hummed beneath me, wet and soft. The fog curled along my legs, pressing up to my knees, curling toward my hands. I stopped again. The fog pressed inward, thick and impenetrable. Shapes twisted around me, leaned against stones that were not there, folded into the void left by the vanished light. I could feel the emptiness around me, dense, alive, anchored in the silence. I exhaled slowly. The fog clung to me like a living thing. Shadows twisted, edges flickering in and out of perception. The lamp remained dead, its pale light consumed. The fog held the world in its gray hands, pressing, swallowing, leaving only the pulse of my own heartbeat, and the subtle weight of shapes that existed only in the mist. I moved forward. The fog shifted slightly, curling with my steps, swallowing light, folding shadows across the earth. Isolation pressed against me, heavy, unyielding, and I was alone, yet not alone, within the gray that consumed everything. The fog clung to the ground, dense and damp, curling around the roots of trees and the edges of stones. The night was quiet, too quiet. I moved slowly. Every step pressed into soft earth moist with dew and decay. Leaves cracked faintly beneath my shoes, yet no other sound followed. Only the hum beneath the soil, vibrating subtly through my legs, and then I saw them, eyes, faint, reflective, blinking at me from the shadows. From every tree, every stone, I stopped. The air hung heavy, cool, and damp against my skin. I could feel the weight of their gaze pressing against my chest. I turned slightly. More eyes, blinking, watching, encircling me. The figure was near, just beyond the edges of vision. I couldn't focus. It lingered, pale and unmoving. The fog twisted around it, pressing closer to the ground, swallowing shapes. I breathed slowly, trying not to startle the silence. The fog shifted slightly, curling along the roots of trees, pressing along my ankles. Every step I took was mirrored in the quiet. Yet the eyes followed with deliberate patience. Branches rustled softly, though no wind moved them. Shadows shifted across the stones, leaning and folding in impossible ways. I tried to step forward. The earth hummed beneath me, vibrating faintly through my shoes, through my legs, into my chest. The eyes remained, blinking, always blinking. I turned slowly. The figure remained just out of reach. The fog curled at my shoulders, cool and damp, pressing lightly, almost gentle, almost alive. I could feel it breathing along with me, its weight pressing down, pulling my chest tight. A stone leaned slightly forward, edges blurred in the mist. The eyes in it flickered, blinking softly, then gone when I tried to focus. Every glance revealed new watchers. Every shadow held a gaze. I whispered a breathless thought. Nothing answered. Only the fog, pressing, curling, alive around me. The hum beneath the earth pulsed faintly, matching my own heartbeat. The figure moved slightly, just a flicker, and the eyes in every corner seemed to lean closer. I exhaled slowly. The fog thickened. Shapes twisted along the edges of vision. Branches brushed lightly against one another. Soft whispers of rustling. I stepped forward cautiously. The ground vibrated, soft and insistent, and the blinking eyes followed each motion. I paused. The figure remained distant, just beyond reach, yet its presence was heavy, anchored in the fog. The eyes, countless, reflective, watching, felt like a weight pressing into the night. The air smelled of damp leaves, earth, cold stone. The fog wrapped around my legs, pressing lightly, coiling along my shoes. Every heartbeat echoed in the dense air, each step mirrored by the unseen. I moved again, slowly, softly, carefully. The fog shifted, curling around roots, stones, sliding along the contours of the earth. The eyes tracked me from every surface, from every shadow, from every fold of the mist. The figure remained, just beyond clarity, a pale, shifting shape, edges blurred, flickering in and out of perception. I felt small, anchored in the center of the gaze, vulnerable in the dense, living fog. I breathed slowly. The night pressed against me, cool and damp. Every blink, every shadow, every twitch of mist felt deliberate, patient. The eyes encircled me, holding me in place, watching, waiting. I exhaled, moved one step forward. The figure shifted slightly and the fog curled around it, pressing along the earth. The eyes remained, countless, reflective, anchoring me in the night, trapped in the silent, unyielding gaze. The fog pressed close around the crypt, cold and damp curling along the stones. I approached slowly, feet sinking slightly into the softened earth. The air smelled of mildew, old stone, and something faintly metallic. The door stood slightly ajar. Darkness pooled behind it, like a weight waiting to be disturbed. I reached toward the handle. A pause. The fog pressed in closer, curling along my arms, my shoulders, and then it happened. The door slammed, silent. No wind, no motion, yet the impact reverberated through the air, shaking the fog. Shadows scattered in sudden motion, leaping across the stones, folding along the walls. I stumbled back. The air vibrated faintly, as if the crypt itself had exhaled. My breath came in shallow wisps, mixing with the dense, wet fog. The ground beneath my feet hummed lightly, soft but insistent, threading through my legs into my chest. The darkness behind the door seemed to shift. Shapes twisted along the edges of perception. I could feel them pressing, leaning from the shadows, but there was nothing to see. Just fog and stone and the silent weight of the slam. I exhaled slowly. The cold air brushed along my neck, sending tiny shivers down my spine. The shadows recoiled and stretched, curling around the corners of the crypt. Every stone leaned slightly, edges blurred in the mist. A soft scrape touched the air. I could feel movement, a gentle press against the fog like fingertips brushing past, but nothing appeared. The door remained closed, solid, unyielding, yet its motion lingered, a silent echo in the thick air. I stepped closer. The fog wrapped around my ankles, pressing lightly, coiling like a living thing. The metal handle was cold under my fingers, damp with mist. Shadows shifted again, twisting along the edges of my vision. I exhaled. The fog seemed to pulse with the memory of the slam, curling along the floor, pressing along my legs. The air smelled of wet stone and decay, carrying the faint hum beneath the soil. Each heartbeat echoed in the dense silence, a lonely drum in the immovable fog. I stepped inside. The door creaked softly, then settled, and the shadows stilled, folding into corners like smoke. The air pressed against me, cool and damp. Every stone seemed heavier, anchored in darkness, and the fog pressed closer, curling along the walls and floor. A movement flickered in the corner of my eye. The figure lingered just beyond reach, edges blurred, shifting softly with the fog. I could feel its presence, patient, waiting, anchored in the silent gloom. The air vibrated slightly, thick with anticipation, as if the slam had awakened something unseen. I exhaled slowly, letting the fog curl around my shoulders, pressing against my chest. Shadows clung to the corners, leaning forward, and the faint metallic scent lingered, cold and sharp in the damp air. The door was still closed, yet the memory of its motion pressed into the room like a living thing. I moved further inside. The fog trailed along my shoes, pressing lightly, curling around the edges of stone. The figure remained just beyond clarity, watching, its presence heavy, a silent weight anchored in the mist. I paused. The crypt was still. The slam had passed, but the echo remained, curling along the walls, pressing into the fog, alive in the silence. I could feel the shadows leaning closer, yet nothing moved. Only the fog, thick and living, and the faint hum of the earth beneath. I exhaled again, and slowly I stepped forward, into the heart of the darkness, where the shadows and the fog waited, silent, patient, anchored in the cold stone, and in the memory of the slam. The fog lay thick across the clearing, cold and damp, curling along the trunks of the trees. My feet pressed into the soft earth, leaves crunching faintly beneath. The air smelled of wet moss, of earth half forgotten, and something older, sharper. I moved forward. A shadow lingered at the edge of vision, just there, beyond clarity. And then it moved, not just near me, exactly like me. Each motion mirrored but delayed, as if the fog itself had remembered my shape and twisted it into something alive. I lifted my hand. The shadow lifted its hand slowly, a breath behind mine, like water trailing a stone. I stepped to the left. It stepped to the left. I felt a shiver crawl along my spine. The fog pressed against my shoulders. Soft, moist, heavy. I could smell it in my hair, hear it rustling along the branches. The shadow paused for a heartbeat longer, then moved. A mimic, patient, tethered to me by some unseen thread. I glanced around. Reflections shimmered in the mist, light bending along fog shapes, distorting. Every movement I made was echoed, slightly behind, slightly off, but undeniably deliberate. A branch snapped underfoot. The echo in the fog followed, soft and delayed. The shadow hesitated, leaning into the echo, as though listening for the rhythm of my breath. I exhaled slowly. The damp air brushed my cheeks, pressed along my neck. The shadow copied again, limbs dragging slightly, edges blurred, pale against the darkness. I could feel its weight in the air, a presence tethered to mine, watching, waiting. I moved faster. The shadow mirrored every step, but always behind like a delayed heartbeat. The fog thickened with each motion, pressing into the small hollows of my chest, making each breath shallow, visible. I could hear the hum beneath the soil, a subtle vibration threading into the soles of my feet. I paused. The shadow paused. We froze together, mist curling between us like smoke. I felt the air hum around my ears, pressing faintly against my skin, while the reflection of myself moved just a whisper behind. A breeze that wasn't there stirred the leaves. The fog twisted and shifted, shadow edges quivering along its folds. It mimicked every twitch, every glance, every shallow breath. A presence, patient, perfect in its delay. I lowered my hand slowly. It followed. I inhaled, fog swirling into my mouth, thick, wet, heavy. The shadow hesitated a fraction of a second, and in that moment I felt unmoored, as though the ground itself had stopped holding me, and I was drifting in the same space as it. The fog wrapped around my ankles. Cold, damp, persistent. The shadow's form remained just beyond clarity, leaning slightly, tethered, edges flickering in and out of focus. It mirrored my fear, my hesitation, but nothing more. I took a step backward. The shadow followed exactly, and I could hear my own heartbeat in the pause between my step and its echo. The air tasted metallic, damp, thick with anticipation. I exhaled, letting the fog press against my chest. The shadow mimicked, but always just a fraction behind, a delayed reflection anchored in the same misty space. It wasn't human. Not entirely. Not exactly. I stopped again. The fog swirled at my feet, curling around roots, stones, small hollows. The shadow paused, hovering, waiting, anchored to me by some invisible thread woven from breath and fog and hesitation. Every movement I made was a command it obeyed, but never instantly. I exhaled slowly. The mist pressed close, wrapping my shoulders in its cold embrace. The shadow hovered, pale, blurred, patient, the reflection of my own body but just a heartbeat behind, and then, quietly, I moved forward again. The fog shifted. The shadow followed. Always behind, always watching, tethered, delayed, and I could feel its presence in every step I took, echoing me in the cold, silent fog. The fog was thick, clinging to the trees like wet cloth. The air lay still, almost heavy, but the leaves whispered violently above me. No wind stirred. Just the rustle, over and over, shivering through branches like teeth. I stopped. A shape flickered in the fog, pale and unsteady. Then it dissolved. Nothing remained. Just the mist curling around the trunks and the wet, metallic scent of earth pressed close. I stepped forward. Each footfall was muffled, swallowed by damp soil. Leaves shivered underfoot, though nothing had passed this way before me. The rustling rose again. Closer, sharper, insistent, shapes formed in the fog. They clung at the edges of vision, blurring and twisting like smoke. I tried to focus, but they dissolved instantly, vanishing into the cold, damp air. A subtle vibration hummed beneath my feet. The ground felt alive, tiny pulses beneath the soles of my shoes. I held my breath. The mist pressed against my cheeks, slick and cold. I could smell the wet leaves, the faint decay of old bark. Something shifted to my left. A shadow, elongated, bending around the trunks like it didn't belong. I turned slowly. Nothing. The fog was just fog. And yet the rustling continued. Violent, relentless, as if leaves were trying to speak, but the sound was swallowed by still air. A subtle outline appeared. A dark, shifting figure, its edges trembling in the pale light that filtered through the fog. It moved, or maybe it was the fog itself, twisting in impossible ways. Every time I looked directly, it vanished. Every time I turned away, it lingered. I walked, careful. Each step echoed softly, the fog swallowing sound quickly. Yet the rustling followed, wrapping around me, curling along my shoulders like cold fingers. My skin prickled. Every tree seemed to watch, every shadow waiting. I stopped again. The shapes returned, dissolving the instant I tried to catch them. A scent rose from the soil, earth, wet leaves, something faintly metallic, like blood mixed into rain. The mist swirled around my feet, snaking along the roots and stones. Soft footsteps. Maybe mine, maybe another. Each step echoed slightly out of sync, a subtle delay I couldn't place. I breathed shallowly. The rustling rose to a frantic whisper, then dropped to silence. I could feel the fog pressing in on all sides, as if it had weight, as if it could push me down into the soil. I moved faster. The shapes flickered, pale glimpses of limbs and forms that weren't mine. The rustling followed, violent and insistent, though no wind stirred. I could taste the damp air on my tongue, feel it slip down my throat. A cold sweat coated my hands and neck. I stopped again. The fog parted slightly, revealing a cluster of stones half buried in earth. A shadow lingered there, flickering against the mist. I blinked, and it was gone. The rustling continued, and the fog moved as if alive, curling and bending around shapes that didn't exist. I whispered to myself. Nothing answered. Only the rustling, reaching, scratching, whispering. I could feel eyes, dozens, hundreds, blinking from the fog. But whenever I turned, there was nothing but mist and leaves. I walked forward again. The ground trembled faintly beneath me. A sharp metallic scent rose. The rustling intensified. I felt the air tighten around my chest, pressed into my skin, pressing me toward the unseen. Shapes flickered in the fog. I tried to focus. They dissolved instantly. I stopped. The forest was silent. No wind, no footfalls, only the fog and its restless shapes. The leaves hung motionless above me, though the rustling still lingered, like a memory of movement that didn't belong to this world. I breathed, slow and steady, feeling the damp fog cling to my hair, my skin, the chill crawling beneath my clothes. Shapes flickered one last time, then vanished completely. Only the still, heavy air remained, and the faint, echoing rustle of leaves without wind, following me into silence. The fog lay thick tonight, dense and heavy, pressing against my skin. Each breath sounded loud, too loud. I could hear the pulse in my ears, a slow, echoing thrum that filled the still air. Shadows clung to the trees, leaning, bending in ways that made no sense. Light fractured, scattering into angles that should not exist. I stepped carefully. The ground was soft beneath my feet, cold earth giving slightly with each careful step. Silence fell heavier as I moved. It wrapped around me like wet cloth, pulling at my clothes, my hair, my thoughts. Even the fog seemed denser here, turning each exhale into a ghostly mist that lingered. A scent of wet leaves and something faintly metallic drifted upward, hanging in the air like a warning. I paused. A shadow shifted beside a twisted tree. It was still, but its edges trembled against the fog. I blinked, and it had moved a fraction, just enough to unsettle the mind. The silence felt alive. It pressed closer. I felt it on the back of my neck, on my shoulders, as if I were not alone. The light dimmed further. Shapes that had been clear a moment before blurred and warped, bending around each other in impossible ways. Each step I took echoed, though there was no hard surface beneath my shoes. The fog muffled sound, yet amplified everything at once. My breathing, the creak of a distant branch, the subtle drag of earth underfoot. I exhaled slowly. The cold air burned in my lungs. The shadows lengthened, reaching toward me. I could feel them brushing at the fog, distorting it, twisting it like water. There was a hum, barely perceptible, vibrating in the soles of my feet. Or was it my own pulse? I could not tell. I moved again. Each step deliberate. The silence stretched, elastic, and I felt it stretch around my thoughts, pulling my mind taut, fragile. A subtle shift at the corner of vision, something bending the fog as if it were liquid. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. The space was empty. Yet I was not alone. My breath fogged in the air, rising like smoke that refused to disperse. The cold clung to my skin, pressing into my bones. A shadow shifted again, just beyond focus, its presence faint but undeniable. The fog bent around it, curling like smoke, masking its edges, hiding its shape. I stopped. Every sound of my body was magnified. The beat of my heart, the scrape of cloth against leaves, even the faint shift of soil beneath my feet felt loud and wrong. The shadows leaned in closer, stretching impossibly, folding over each other in silent patterns that made no sense. I breathed slowly. Each inhale felt heavier than the last. The fog pressed in tighter, enveloping me, softening edges, swallowing shapes. Even the faintest light refracted strangely, bending around shapes that should not exist. The hollow silence seemed to wait, patient, immovable, as if it knew where I would step next. I walked again. The shadows pulsed slightly with each step, expanding and contracting, mirroring the rhythm of my pulse. The fog clung to my hair, my skin, every movement leaving traces in the still, cold air. I could sense shapes bending the fog, touching it, shaping it with unseen hands. I stopped once more. The silence pressed in from all sides, thick, almost physical. The fog shifted faintly, folding over itself like smoke in a windless room. I could feel the presence of the shadows, hovering, watching, patient. Every breath I drew filled the hollow space, and yet it was never enough. I exhaled. The fog trembled but remained. The shadows pressed but made no move to reach me. The light bent, the air was cold, and the silence waited hollow, heavy, unbroken. I moved forward, slow, careful, and the fog swallowed me whole. The fog was thick tonight. It pressed against my skin, cold and damp, wrapping the world in pale gray. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches scratching at the mist. Each breath left a cloud that lingered too long, and I could feel it curling around my face, pressing against my lips. I walked slowly, each footstep soft against the damp earth. The air was still, yet the faintest rustle echoed in the fog, like whispers brushing past leaves. A smell of wet soil and decay clung to the mist, settling in my nose, thick and pungent. Then I saw it. Hands, pale and thin, almost translucent. They reached through the fog, stretching toward me, fingers curling like they wanted something I had. I froze. The fog shifted as if the hands had weight, pressing against the air between us. I held my breath. They vanished when I tried to touch them. Just like that, gone. The cold lingered where they had been, like ice wrapping my skin in their absence. I took a step back, and the fog moved with me, clinging, twisting, folding. The shadow figure paused further off, watching, quiet. Its presence was palpable, even though I could barely see it. The fog obscured every edge, but I could feel its gaze, sharp and unblinking. My heartbeat thumped against my ribs, matching the slow rhythm of the unseen figure. I reached out, fingers trembling, and a hand appeared again, pale as the fog itself, hovering, suspended in space. I touched it lightly. It dissolved instantly, the cold bite lingering on my skin. I inhaled sharply. The mist carried my breath away, swallowing the sound into silence. The ground beneath me shifted slightly, like soft soil settling, though no wind moved the leaves. The fog curled around my legs, clinging like damp cloth. Every shadow seemed to pulse and stretch, and the trees leaned inward, closer than before, as if they were listening. I moved forward, careful, and more hands appeared. Thin, skeletal, grasping at air, then vanishing before I could fully see them. A hum rose from the earth, subtle and low, vibrating through my shoes, through my bones. It was a vibration I could feel, but not here, pressing into my chest. The shadow figure remained still, its edges blurred against the mist. I could sense it moving slightly, like it followed the rhythm of my pulse. Every time I looked away, the hands would appear in another place, just at the edge of vision. And every time I turned, they vanished again. A whisper brushed past my ear, or maybe it was just the fog shifting. I could feel breath against my neck, cold, fleeting. The hands reached once more, hovering in the gray, and I noticed something. They were smaller than mine, fragile, almost childlike, and they trembled as if afraid. I shivered. The shadow figure took a step forward, though the fog swallowed its movement. The hands disappeared entirely now, leaving nothing but the chill of their absence. I could feel the presence of the fog tightening, thickening with every heartbeat, wrapping me in stillness. I exhaled slowly. The air felt heavier with every breath. The shadow figure lingered, watching, silent and unmoving. I could not see its face, but I knew it was aware of my fear, aware of the fragile hands that had vanished, and aware of me, alone in the mist. I took another step, careful and quiet. The fog shifted as if responding, coiling around the earth around my legs. The shadows stretched toward me, soft and deliberate. I felt the chill where the hands had been, the absence still biting at my skin, and then, just like that, the fog swallowed them completely. The hands were gone, the shadow remained, watching, waiting. I moved on slowly, the cold lingering on my fingers, the hum beneath my feet, and the whisper of something unseen brushing always at the edge of my vision. The fog held me in place, but I walked forward anyway, hands pale in memory, shadow following silently. The fog was heavier than usual. It clung to the ground, curling around roots and stones. The cemetery lay quiet, yet alive in some subtle, shifting way. Each breath I took felt damp and thick, pressing against my chest as I walked. I noticed the first gravestone move almost imperceptibly. A tilt, a shift. I blinked. It was as if the stone had sighed, settling into a new position. The air smelled of wet earth and old moss. Pale light caught on the carved letters that seemed different. I moved forward, careful, soft footsteps on the damp soil. Another gravestone shifted slightly, nudged by unseen hands. Paths curved where none had before, bending at impossible angles. I felt my pulse rise, though I tried to slow my breathing, letting each step sink into the silence. The fog thickened, swallowing shapes just at the edge of vision. I stopped. A sense of being watched prickled at my skin. Shadows stretched between the stones, long and twisting, but nothing moved in a normal way. The earth seemed to hum beneath my feet, a vibration I could feel but not hear. The chill seeped into my bones, and I shivered, imagining the stones shifting again. Another tilt. A soft scrape, almost like fingernails on wet wood, echoed faintly beneath the fog. I crouched, trying to see the path I had just walked. It was not the same. The markers I had passed were subtly different. Angles wrong, distances changed. I felt dizzy, unsteady, like the world had slipped sideways while I wasn't looking. The fog pressed closer, damp and cold. I could see shapes forming in the gray, then dissolving before I could focus. A shadow flitted between the stones, too fast to follow, and my heartbeat matched the rhythm of something unseen, soft and deliberate. I reached out to steady myself on a gravestone. It felt solid, then tilted slightly under my touch, rocking just enough to make me step back. The scent of wet stone and earth grew stronger, clinging to my clothes, to my hair, to my skin. I could feel the fog moving around me, curling over my shoulders like a living thing. A low hum rose from beneath the ground, or perhaps from the fog itself. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was everywhere, vibrating in my chest, shaking through the soles of my shoes. Gravestones shifted again. One slid inches to the left, another rotated, carving a new shadow on the earth. Paths bent like smoke curling in impossible arcs. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked unfamiliar, every stone slightly wrong. The shadow figure lingered in the fog, its form vague, blurred. I could feel it watching, measured, patient. I tried to focus, but the fog swallowed everything else, folding space around the stones. Another soft scrape. I flinched, feeling the vibration in the soles of my feet. The fog swirled at eye level, hiding shapes, making the cemetery feel alive and hostile. My fingers brushed a tombstone. It rocked slightly under my touch, then slid silently back into place, as if testing me. I breathed slowly, letting the fog fill my lungs, letting the cold damp press against my skin. Each gravestone seemed to watch me, though I could see nothing but shifting shapes. The shadows stretched across paths that had moved, and I realized I was not walking forward, but floating through a space that refused to remain still. The fog thickened further, and the cemetery grew silent again. The hum faded, the soft scrape vanished, and the stones held their new positions. Yet I could feel them watching, pressing their presence into the air, a quiet tension lingering in every tilt, every subtle shift. I stepped carefully, slowly, letting the fog curl around my legs, letting the cold press against my chest. The cemetery remained in motion, just at the edge of perception, and I kept moving, aware of every impossible angle, every gravestone that might shift underfoot, and the shadow following quietly in the fog. The fog lay heavy across the ground. It clung to my legs, to my fingers, and curled into the hollows between gravestones. The air smelled damp, earthy, with a hint of cold stone. Each breath felt thick, pressing against my chest, and the silence was almost unbearable. I could feel it before I saw anything. A presence, everywhere and nowhere. It pressed against my skin like a chill, slid along my spine like fingers I could not see. I turned slowly. Nothing. Yet the feeling remained, patient and watchful. The hum began beneath my feet. Soft at first, vibrating through the soil, then growing faintly louder, a pulse that made my teeth tingle, like the world itself was breathing. I bent closer to the earth, touching the damp ground, feeling the static beneath my fingertips. Shadows flickered in the fog. Shapes, blurred and fleeting, vanished when I tried to focus. A pale light caught on the edge of a gravestone, and I could swear the shadow figure lingered there, hovering silently, observing. Not moving, not breathing, yet its presence filled the space between the stones. I walked slowly. Each footstep pressed into wet leaves, rustling softly, yet the fog swallowed every echo, making my own movement feel strange and foreign. I stopped. The hum from the earth continued, a heartbeat I could not escape. The figure did not step closer, did not retreat, simply waited, patient, silent. I reached out toward a shadow that flickered at eye level. My fingers passed through fog thick as wool, through nothing and everywhere at once. A cold shiver ran down my arms, and the hum vibrated in my chest. I could feel the figure's gaze pressing without eyes, tracing my movements in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. The gravestones seemed to lean subtly, tilting just enough to make the fog swirl differently around them. Paths shifted underfoot, like the earth itself was breathing, folding, bending. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction felt new, unfamiliar, and the presence remained unyielding, patient. The fog whispered against my cheeks, a soft brush of damp air. I could feel shapes forming, then dissolving, in the corners of my vision, and I realized I had not truly been alone. The shadow figure mirrored the slightest movements, a delayed reflection of my posture, not in form, but in essence. I closed my eyes briefly. The hum grew stronger, resonating in my teeth, through my spine, through the soles of my shoes. When I opened them again, the fog was thicker, denser than before, and yet the figure had not left. It floated somewhere beyond clarity, watching without being seen. I moved again, careful, deliberate. Each step pressed into the damp earth, feeling static in the soles of my shoes, hearing my own breath louder than the world around me. The fog bent light strangely, casting shapes that should not exist. And the figure remained just at the edge of vision, a presence I could feel but never grasp. I stopped and listened. The world held its breath. The hum from the earth pulsed softly. The fog wrapped around me like a living thing, and the shadow figure lingered, silent, patient, impossible to measure. I exhaled slowly, letting the damp air fill my lungs, letting the sensation of being watched press against me. The gravestones held their positions. The paths stayed bent and unsteady. and I realized I could not escape the gaze, because it was not a gaze at all. It was awareness itself, hovering, observing everywhere and nowhere, watching without being seen. I took another step, soft, careful, alone. The fog shifted gently, and the shadow figure remained, its presence pressing through the silence, through the hum, through the earth beneath me, quiet, patient, eternal. The edge of the cemetery stretched before me. The wrought iron gate loomed, black and twisted. Fog swirled at my feet, rising like liquid, curling around the gravestones. It smelled faintly of damp earth, cold stone, and something older, almost metallic. I stepped forward. The ground was soft, uneven beneath my boots, and the air hummed, low and steady, pressing in my chest. The shadow figure paused beyond the gate, its shape pale against the fog, flickering at the edges. I froze, breath shallow, heart echoing in the silence. The fog moved around the gate, swelling like a tide against iron. I could feel its pull, gentle, insistent. Leaves rustled in the stillness, though no wind blew. The world felt empty, yet somehow crowded, as though something watched from everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to step again. My foot lifted. Then hesitation gripped me, rooting me to the cold earth. The figure remained, patient, unmoving, a shadow that mirrored my fear without showing it. The hum beneath me deepened. It thrummed through the soles of my shoes, through my fingers pressed to the damp grass, through the pulse at my temples. I realized the air itself had weight, pressing down, folding around the space between us. I was not sure if I wanted to move forward or to dissolve into the fog behind me. The gate creaked softly, a sigh or a warning. I could see the shadow stretch, flicker across the iron bars like it was tasting the air between us. I inhaled slowly, feeling the mist brush my face, cold and wet, and the faint pulse of something alive beneath the soil. I wanted to speak, to call the figure's name, but my voice caught, swallowed by the hum. I watched it tilt slightly, like it was considering me, like it waited for a choice I could not make. The fog thickened further, and the gate seemed to sink into it. Shapes twisted in the corners of my vision, impossible angles of light bending through mist. The shadow remained, patient, and I felt a strange calm settle beneath the fear, a quiet understanding that I was alone, yet not truly alone at all. I lifted a hand toward it. Fingers trembled through the fog. It mirrored me, slowly, deliberately, but paused, just shy of reaching. The space between us held a weight, a suspended moment I could neither push nor step away from. The hum softened, then faded to a static whisper, like breathing through layers of cloth. The world beyond the gate seemed to dissolve, colors draining, shapes melting into gray, and the shadow waited, always waiting, patient, silent, impossible to name. I felt the fog curl around my ankles, rising, wrapping, pressing lightly against my skin. The gate felt heavy beneath my touch, iron cold and slick with dew. I realized I could take a step, and the shadow would still be there, beyond the threshold, watching without moving, beyond the reach of sight or sound. I exhaled, slowly, letting the air shiver in my chest. The hum returned faintly, almost a whisper, rising from the earth, rising from everywhere. The fog shifted, soft, slow, and the shadow figure stayed beyond the gate, a presence I could feel more than see, a patient pulse in the silence. I did not move, and I did not turn back. I stayed, half in the fog, half in the cold light, watching the shadow, feeling the hum, alone, yet somehow not. The gate waited. The figure waited. And I waited too, in the quiet, in the fog, breathing slowly, listening to the earth itself, and to the pulse of something just beyond understanding.